Millionaire invites ex-wife to his wedding to shame her, but she stuns him with an unbelievable. The sleek black envelope arrived on a crisp October morning, nestled between utility bills and a catalogue from Williams-Sonoma. Clara Bennett nearly missed it as she sorted through the stack at her kitchen counter, sunlight streaming through the bay windows of her Brooklyn Heights apartment. But the gilded edges caught her eye, and she paused, her fingers hesitating over the elegant script embossed across the front. Elliot Grayson and Sophia Reed request the honor of your presence at their wedding. For a moment the world seemed to still. Clara blinked, rereading the names. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. Elliot Grayson, her ex-husband, the man who had once promised her the world before casting her aside in his pursuit of power, was marrying again, and he wanted her there to witness it. Her first instinct was to toss the invitation in the trash, but curiosity tugged at her. Clara sat down at the marble-topped kitchen island, the envelope still in her hand. She traced her fingers over the embossed letters, memories flooding back like a dam had burst. They had met during their junior year at Boston University, where Clara had been a literature major with dreams of becoming a writer, and Elliot was an ambitious business student with an eye for startups. He'd swept her off her feet with his charm and unrelenting determination. Clara could still picture the small Italian bistro, Trattoria di Monica, where they'd had their first date in Boston's North End. Elliot had been late, caught up in a meeting with his tech co-founder, but he'd arrived with flowers from a street vendor and an apology that seemed to erase the frustration. "I promise you," he had said over a shared plate of tiramisu, "one day we'll have everything we've ever dreamed of. You'll have the freedom to write your novels, and I'll make sure you never have to worry about anything." But that promise had come with a price. As Elliot's ambitions grew, so did the distance between them. Late nights turned into missed dinners, and Clara's dreams of writing were pushed aside to support his relentless pursuit of success. Their marriage had unraveled like a poorly tied knot. By the time Elliot's company, Grayson Enterprises, had secured its first multi-million-dollar deal, Clara felt like a ghost in her own life. The man she had fallen in love with had been consumed by his hunger for wealth and status. The final straw had come during a heated argument when Elliot dismissed her writing as a hobby that wasn't worth investing time in. When the divorce papers arrived, Clara had signed them without hesitation. She had walked away with little more than her dignity and a burning determination to rebuild her life. And rebuild she did. Clara poured herself into her work, founding Bright Horizons, a non-profit that provided literacy programs for underserved communities. Over time, her small organization grew into a nationally recognized initiative. Clara stared at the invitation, her mind reeling. Why would Elliot want her at his wedding? It felt less like an olive branch and more like a calculated move. Knowing him, it probably was. He thrived on appearances, and what better way to flaunt his new life than by inviting the woman he had left behind? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend, Naomi Carter. "Naomi, brunch tomorrow? You need to spill the tea on that gala last week." Clara typed a quick reply. "Sure, and I have something even juicier to tell you." As she set her phone down, Clara made a decision. She would go to the wedding, not for Elliot, but for herself. She wanted to see with her own eyes the life he thought was better than the one they'd shared. And perhaps, just perhaps, she'd remind him that she wasn't the same woman he had underestimated. That night, Clara opened her laptop and began researching Elliot's fiancée, Sophia Reed. A quick Google search revealed dozens of articles and Instagram posts about the it-girl socialite. Sophia was stunning, with a penchant for designer brands like Dior and Gucci, and a flawless feed filled with exotic vacations and red carpet appearances. Clara smirked. "Of course," she muttered under her breath. But as she scrolled further, something about Sophia's polished perfection seemed hollow. Clara leaned back in her chair, her thoughts turning to her wardrobe. If she was going to attend this spectacle, she needed to make an impression, and she knew just the designer to call: Christian Siriano. The first chapter ends with Clara dialing a number, determination sparking in her eyes. "Hi, Megan. It's Clara Bennett. I need a dress. Something unforgettable." The steady hum of conversation and clinking cutlery filled the air as Clara walked into Bluebird London, her favorite brunch spot overlooking Columbus Circle. The chic interior, with its sleek navy blue booths and brass fixtures, was the perfect backdrop for New York's elite to sip mimosas and trade gossip. But Clara wasn't here for gossip, not entirely. Naomi Carter waved her over, a radiant smile lighting up her face. Her auburn curls framed her sharp features, and her emerald green blazer matched her vibrant personality. Naomi had been Clara's rock through the tumultuous years of her divorce, always ready with a bottle of wine or a well-timed reality check. "Over here, darling," Naomi called, raising her glass of Prosecco. Clara slid into the booth opposite her, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You always manage to make me feel like I'm walking into an episode of Sex and the City." Naomi laughed, raising her glass in a toast. "What can I say? I'm a classic Samantha with a hint of Miranda. Now spill. You said you had something juicy, and I've been dying to know all morning." Clara hesitated, glancing at the menu before setting it down. She reached into her purse and pulled out the sleek black invitation, sliding it across the table. Naomi's eyes widened as she picked it up. "Elliot," she exclaimed, her voice loud enough to draw a few curious glances. "That smug bastard invited you to his wedding. What's his game?" Clara shrugged, leaning back in her seat. "I've been trying to figure that out myself. He doesn't do anything without a reason." Naomi's eyes narrowed as she scanned the invitation. "Sophia Reed? Isn't she that socialite who hosted that charity gala at the plaza last year? I remember reading about her in Vogue. Looks like Elliot's trying to upgrade his image." Clara smirked, though there was no humor in it. "It's not like he needs to. His company's valuation hit the billions last year. He's got everything he ever wanted: money, power, a trophy fiancé. And now he wants me to see it." Naomi set the invitation down with a sharp tap. "So what are you going to do? Ignore it? Send a strongly worded letter? Hire a skywriter to tell him to go to hell?" "I'm going," Clara said, her voice calm but firm. Naomi blinked, momentarily stunned. "You're serious?" Clara nodded. "It's not about him. It's about me. I need to see for myself that I'm past all of it, that he doesn't have power over me anymore. Besides—" She paused, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "I wouldn't mind showing him what he gave up." Naomi leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Now that's the Clara I know. Okay, if you're going to do this, you need to go all in. No half measures. What's the plan?" The two women spent the next hour crafting a strategy that felt more like preparing for a battle than attending a wedding. Naomi sipped her Prosecco thoughtfully as Clara outlined her ideas. "First," Clara began, "I need a dress. Not just any dress. A showstopper. I'm thinking Christian Siriano, or maybe something custom from Oscar de la Renta." Naomi nodded approvingly. "Good start. You need to remind everyone in that room, including Elliot, that you're a force to be reckoned with." "Second," Clara continued, "I'll arrive with someone, not to make Elliot jealous. That's not the point. But to show him that I've moved on, that I'm not dwelling on the past." Naomi arched an eyebrow. "Anyone in mind?" Clara hesitated. She thought of James Gallagher, the charismatic business tycoon she'd met at a fundraiser last year. They had shared a few dinners, but she had kept things light. James was magnetic, charming, and, most importantly, respected. "I might have someone," Clara admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. Naomi leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "James Gallagher? Please tell me it's James Gallagher." Clara rolled her eyes, though she couldn't suppress a smile. "We'll see." "Perfect. And the final step?" Naomi asked, gesturing for the waiter to bring another round of drinks. Clara's expression turned serious. I need to be prepared for whatever Elliot throws my way. This isn't just a wedding, it's a stage. He'll want to show off, to prove that he's won. But I'm not playing that game. I'm showing up for me, for the woman I've become. Naomi reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. You've already won, Clara. He just doesn't know it yet. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Clara scheduled a fitting at Christian Siriano's studio in the garment district, where the designer himself suggested a sleek crimson gown with a plunging neckline and intricate beadwork. This dress says power, confidence, and a touch of revenge, Siriano said with a wink as Clara admired herself in the mirror. Next came the details. A diamond bracelet from Tiffany Co., a pair of Christian Louboutin heels, and a hairstylist appointment at Frederick Fekkai on Fifth Avenue. Every choice was deliberate, a reflection of the strength she had reclaimed since her divorce. As the day of the wedding approached, Clara felt a mix of nerves and resolve. She knew attending would stir emotions she hadn't faced in years, but she also knew it was time to close this chapter of her life, for good. On the eve of the wedding, Clara sat alone in her living room, a glass of wine in hand. The crimson gown hung nearby, a symbol of the woman she had become. She thought about Elliot, about the life they had shared and the one she had built without him. Her phone buzzed with a message from James. Looking forward to tomorrow. I'll pick you up at 3. Clara smiled, a sense of calm settling over her. She wasn't walking into Elliot's wedding as a scorned ex-wife. She was walking in as Clara Bennett, strong, successful, and unshakable. The chapter closes with Clara standing before her bedroom mirror, holding her head high as she whispers to herself, "This time, I'm writing my own story." This chapter builds the emotional tension and sets the stage for the dramatic confrontation to come, while delving into Clara's motivations and preparations in vivid, realistic detail. The morning of the wedding dawned with a pale, wintry sun breaking through the clouds. Clara stood at her bedroom window, gazing out over the Manhattan skyline. The city pulsed with its usual energy, but for Clara, time seemed to have slowed. Today wasn't just another day, it was a moment she had been building toward since the day she signed her divorce papers. Her thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell's chime. Clara walked to the door and opened it to find Naomi standing there, holding 2 coffee cups and a mischievous grin. "Thought you might need a caffeine boost," Naomi said, stepping inside. She handed Clara a blue bottle coffee cup, setting her oversized tote on the entryway bench. "You know me too well," Clara said, taking a sip and sighing. The warmth of the coffee settled her nerves, if only slightly. Naomi surveyed the apartment, her sharp eyes catching the crimson gown draped carefully over a chair. "Wow," she said, running her fingers lightly over the intricate beadwork. "This is a statement. You're going to turn heads." "That's the idea," Clara replied with a wry smile. "But it's not just about appearances. It's about showing myself that I'm not afraid of the past." Naomi nodded, her expression softening. "You've come so far, Clara. Just remember, this day isn't about him. It's about you." By mid-afternoon, Clara was ready. She stepped into the heels, feeling a surge of confidence as she smoothed down the fabric of the gown. Naomi had left earlier, promising to text updates from the venue. Clara's phone buzzed with a message from James Gallagher. "James, outside whenever you're ready. Take your time, no rush." Clara glanced at herself in the mirror one last time. Her makeup was flawless, a blend of subtle glamour that enhanced her natural beauty. Her hair, styled in soft waves, cascaded over one shoulder. She wasn't just dressed for a wedding, she was dressed for battle. Downstairs, James waited beside his sleek black Mercedes Maybach, looking as polished as ever in a tailored midnight blue suit. He greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes lingering on her as she approached. "Clara," he said, his voice low and admiring, "you look stunning." "Thank you," she replied, a hint of a blush warming her cheeks. "You're not so bad yourself." As they drove toward the venue, James kept the conversation light, sensing her underlying tension. When they pulled up to the Pierre Hotel, its iconic Beaux-Arts facade glimmering in the afternoon light, Clara took a deep breath. "You ready?" James asked, offering her his arm. "Ready as I'll ever be," Clara replied, taking it. The grand ballroom of the Pierre was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the scent of white roses filled the air. Guests mingled, their laughter and conversation blending into a symphony of wealth and privilege. Clara scanned the room, her gaze landing on Elliot almost immediately. He stood near the front of the room, impeccably dressed in a tailored black tuxedo. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his confident posture exuded the arrogance she remembered all too well. Beside him was Sophia, radiant in a gown adorned with Swarovski crystals, her laughter bright but hollow. Clara felt James's reassuring hand on the small of her back as they entered. The room seemed to shift as guests noticed them, whispers spreading like wildfire. Clara Bennett, the ex-wife, had arrived, and she wasn't alone. Elliot's eyes found hers, and for a brief moment his polished facade faltered. He recovered quickly, but Clara caught the flicker of surprise, and something deeper, something almost like regret. Sophia turned, her expression slipping into something closer to irritation than welcome. She whispered something to Elliot, who gave a tight-lipped response before excusing himself and making his way toward Clara. "Clara," Elliot said, his tone carefully neutral. His gaze flicked to James, who stood beside her like a sentinel. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would either," Clara replied smoothly, "but I figured why not? It's not every day you get to see an ex remarry." Elliot chuckled, though the sound lacked humor. "Well, I'm glad you're here. I hope you'll enjoy the evening." James extended a hand, his voice polite but firm. "James Gallagher, Clara's date for the evening." Elliot's expression tightened as he shook James's hand. "Of course, I've heard of you. A rival in the energy sector, if I'm not mistaken." "Competitor," James corrected with a faint smile. "Rivalry implies I'm chasing something. I prefer to stay ahead." The tension between the two men was palpable, but Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she met Elliot's gaze, her voice calm. "You've done well for yourself, Elliot. Congratulations on everything." Elliot opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a commotion at the other end of the room drew their attention. Sophia had spilled a glass of champagne, her frustration visible as she waved over a server. The moment broke whatever hold Elliot had on the conversation, and Clara turned away, her heart steady. As the evening progressed, Clara found herself approached by several guests, many of whom expressed admiration for her work with Bright Horizons. One guest, an older woman in an elegant emerald gown, took Clara's hand and whispered, "You're the real success story in this room, my dear. Don't ever forget that." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had expected this night to test her resilience, but instead it was reaffirming her worth. Elliot watched from across the room, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he saw Clara not as the woman he had left behind, but as someone who had transcended him entirely. Clara stepping onto the dance floor with James, her laughter light and genuine. As the music swirled around them, she felt something she hadn't in years: freedom. The evening unfolded in a rhythm of toasts, laughter, and clinking glasses, but for Clara it felt like moving through a carefully choreographed play where everyone wore a mask. The grandeur of the event, the shimmering chandeliers, the meticulously arranged white roses, and the glittering attire of the guests only heightened the feeling of artificiality. She couldn't shake the sensation that every glance in her direction carried a whispered question or an unspoken judgment. Standing near the edge of the ballroom, Clara sipped her champagne, the cool liquid grounding her. Beside her, James was effortlessly charming a small circle of guests, weaving humor and wit into their conversation. His presence was a steadying force, but Clara's mind kept drifting to Elliot. She hadn't missed the flicker of something in his eyes when they first saw each other. Regret? Jealousy? It didn't matter, not anymore, or so she told herself. Clara Bennett. The voice was smooth, practiced, and unmistakably familiar. Clara turned to find Elliot standing a few feet away, holding a glass of bourbon. His expression was unreadable, but his posture carried the confidence of a man used to commanding attention. "Elliot," she replied, her voice calm. "Enjoying your big day?" He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's been a memorable evening. I wasn't expecting you to come." "You invited me," Clara pointed out. "What kind of guest would I be if I ignored such a thoughtful gesture?" His lips quirked in what might have been amusement. "Touché. I'm curious, though. What made you accept?" Clara considered her response. She could have chosen something polite, deflective, but she decided on honesty instead. "To remind myself that I've moved on, and to see if you have." Elliot's smile faltered, just for a moment. He swirled the bourbon in his glass, his gaze dropping to the amber liquid. "I see you've brought quite the date. James Gallagher, of all people. Strategic choice?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "He's a friend, Elliot. Not everything is a calculated move." "Isn't it?" he countered, his tone softer now, almost introspective. "We both know how this world works." She tilted her head, studying him. There was something different about him tonight, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. But before she could respond, the band struck up a lively tune, and Sophia appeared at Elliot's side, her smile tight. "There you are," Sophia said, looping her arm through his. Her gaze flicked to Clara, cool and assessing. "Clara, I'm so glad you could make it. You've certainly been the topic of conversation." Clara met her gaze evenly. "I imagine I have." Sophia's smile widened, though it didn't soften. "Elliot mentioned you're running a non-profit now. Bright Horizons, was it?" "Such noble work." "Yes," Clara replied, her voice steady. "It's been incredibly fulfilling. Helping others has a way of putting things into perspective." Sophia's expression wavered, just for a moment, before she recovered. "How wonderful. We should talk more sometime. I've been considering starting a foundation of my own." Clara smiled, her tone measured. "I'd be happy to share some insights, though I should warn you, it takes more than a name and a checkbook." The subtle barb wasn't lost on Sophia, whose grip on Elliot's arm tightened. "Excuse us," she said with a strained laugh. "We need to check on a few things." Elliot hesitated, his eyes lingering on Clara for a moment, before letting Sophia lead him away. Clara exhaled, the tension ebbing as they disappeared into the crowd. Later that evening, Clara found herself on the balcony, the cool night air, a welcome reprieve from the heat of the ballroom. The city stretched out before her, its lights shimmering like a sea of stars. She leaned against the railing, letting the quiet soothe her. "You were always good at making an exit." Elliot's voice broke the silence. Clara didn't turn, keeping her gaze on the skyline. "Some things never change." He stepped beside her, the faint scent of bourbon and cedarwood cologne wafting in the breeze. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "I wanted to thank you," Elliot said finally. "For what?" "For coming, for showing me." He trailed off, his voice thick with something Clara couldn't quite place. "For showing me that you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Clara turned to face him, her expression guarded. "Elliot, you don't need to say these things. It's your wedding day." "That's just it," he said, his voice low. "This day, this whole life I've built, it's everything I thought I wanted. But seeing you tonight, hearing people talk about what you've done, I realize something. You found meaning, purpose. I've been chasing, I don't even know what anymore." Clara's heart tightened, but she held her ground. "You made your choices, Elliot, and I made mine. I'm proud of the woman I've become." He nodded, his gaze dropping. "You should be." For a moment, They were just two people standing under the stars, the noise of the world fading into the background. Clara felt a pang of sadness for what they had lost, but also a deep sense of gratitude for what she had gained. "I wish you happiness, Elliot," she said softly. "I truly do." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and something that might have been admiration. "And I wish I had been the man you deserved." As Clara walked back into the ballroom, she felt lighter, as though she had finally set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. James was waiting for her, his smile warm and steady. "Everything okay?" he asked, offering her his hand. "More than okay," Clara replied, taking it. They stepped onto the dance floor, the music swelling around them. For the first time in years, Clara felt a profound sense of closure and the freedom to embrace whatever came next. The reception was winding down, the grandeur of the event now muted by the subtle fatigue of its guests. Clara could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The bursts of laughter had softened into murmurs. The lively music had given way to slower, more reflective melodies. She stood near the edge of the ballroom, a glass of champagne in her hand, observing the room with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She wasn't a participant in this spectacle anymore. She was an observer, a woman who had come to witness the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, not for Elliot, but for herself. As Clara considered slipping away, Elliot approached her one final time. His bow tie was slightly loosened, and the sharp edges of his demeanor had softened, replaced by something more vulnerable. He gestured toward the quieter corner of the room, where they could speak without interruption. "I wanted to catch you before you left," he began, his voice lower than before, tinged with exhaustion. Clara raised an eyebrow but followed him, curiosity mingled with the lingering sense of closure she had found on the balcony. "What is it, Elliot?" she asked, her tone measured but not unkind. He hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair. "I've been thinking a lot tonight, about us, about what I let slip away." He looked up at her, and for a moment the polished businessman was gone, replaced by the young man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I never said it back then, but I'm sorry, Clara. For everything. For the way I treated you, for not appreciating what we had." Clara felt a pang in her chest, not of longing, but of bittersweet acknowledgement. "I've forgiven you, Elliot," she said softly. "I forgave you a long time ago. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying that weight wasn't helping me, it was holding me back." He nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers. "You're incredible, you know that. The things you've accomplished, the way people talk about you tonight. You've become everything I thought I was chasing, but I see now it wasn't about the success. It was about the person behind it." Clara gave him a small smile, the kind that held a world of understanding. "We both had to grow in different ways, Elliot. What we had, it taught me strength, resilience, and it taught me to believe in myself. I wouldn't trade those lessons for anything." He took a deep breath, as if letting go of something he'd held on to for too long. "Thank you, Clara, for being here, for everything. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." "I already have," she replied, her voice steady. "I hope you find it too." They parted with a handshake that felt more like a truce, a final closing of the door on their shared history. As Clara watched him return to the party, she felt no sadness, no regret, only peace. James found her soon after, his presence as grounding as ever. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone gentle but inquisitive. "Better than okay," Clara replied, slipping her arm through his. "It feels like a weight has been lifted." He smiled, nodding toward the exit. "Shall we?" As they left the ballroom, the cool night air greeted them, crisp and refreshing after the heat and noise of the reception. The city lights stretched out before them, vibrant and alive, a reminder that life always moved forward. They walked in companionable silence to the waiting car, the hum of the engine blending with the distant sounds of New York. Clara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, her thoughts quiet but content. The next morning, Clara sat at her desk, a steaming cup of tea beside her. The sunlight streamed through the windows of her apartment, bathing the room in a warm glow. She opened her laptop and pulled up the draft of her latest article, a personal essay for a prominent magazine that had asked her to write about resilience and reinvention. The words flowed easily now, no longer tinged with the bitterness or uncertainty that had colored her earlier drafts. She wrote about loss and growth, about the unexpected beauty of finding oneself after a storm. And as she typed the final sentences, she realized how far she had come. Later that day, her phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. It was a short message, uncharacteristically simple. "Thank you for coming last night. Seeing you reminded me of what really matters. I hope our paths cross again someday." Clara read the message twice, then smiled before setting her phone down. She didn't feel the need to reply. The conversation they had shared the night before was enough. Weeks later, Clara found herself standing in the lobby of a Manhattan hotel, waiting for James. They were heading to a gala for Bright Horizons, a celebration of the organization's latest achievements. When he arrived, his smile was warm and his hand steady as he led her toward the waiting car. "You ready for another big night?" he teased. "Always," Clara replied, her confidence unshakable. As they drove through the bustling streets of New York, Clara looked out at the city she had come to love so deeply. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, of the woman she had become through struggle, growth, and rediscovery. The chapter ends with Clara stepping out of the car at the gala, her head held high, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life, not as someone defined by her past, but as the author of her own story. The weeks following Elliot's wedding were a time of reflection and quiet transformation for Clara. Each day seemed to carry her further from the shadow of her past and deeper into the light of the life she had built. Her work with Bright Horizons thrived, her personal relationships grew richer, and the weight she hadn't realized she was carrying finally lifted. But this journey wasn't without its pivotal moments, each one a reminder of how far she had come and where she was going. It began with a simple errand. Clara was walking through the Strand bookstore, one of her favorite places in New York City, searching for a first edition to gift a friend. The scent of old paper and the quiet hum of readers flipping pages filled the air, a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. As she browsed the shelves, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Clara?" She turned and froze. Standing just a few feet away was Sophia Reed, Elliot's new wife. Sophia was impeccably dressed, her coat cinched perfectly at the waist, her makeup flawless. But there was an edge to her expression, a crack in her polished demeanor. "Sophia," Clara said, her voice calm but curious. "This is unexpected." Sophia's smile was tight. "I thought so too, but I couldn't let the moment pass. I wanted to apologize." The words hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. Clara arched an eyebrow, but said nothing, letting Sophia continue. "I know how I came across at the wedding," Sophia said, her gaze dropping momentarily. "I was threatened, insecure. You walked in with all this presence, and I felt small. I'm not proud of how I acted." Clara studied her for a moment before replying. "It takes courage to admit that. I appreciate your honesty." Sophia sighed, a hint of vulnerability breaking through. "For what it's worth, I think Elliot realized something that night. He hasn't said much, but there's been a shift. I think seeing you made him reflect on the choices he's made." Clara nodded, a flicker of sympathy passing through her. "We all grow in our own time. I hope you find what you're looking for, Sophia." Sophia looked at her, something close to gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you. And congratulations, by the way, on everything." As Sophia walked away, Clara felt an odd sense of closure, not just with Elliot, but with the entire chapter of her life that had revolved around him. The annual gala for Bright Horizons was one of the biggest nights of the year. Held at the elegant Cipriani Wall Street, the event drew philanthropists, corporate leaders, and public figures eager to support the cause of literacy and education. Clara arrived with James, her crimson gown from Christian Siriano, drawing admiring glances. The evening was a whirlwind of speeches, networking, and heartfelt moments. But the highlight came when Clara was called to the stage to accept an award for her contributions to social impact. Standing at the podium, Clara looked out at the sea of faces. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "This recognition isn't just for me, it's for the team that makes Bright Horizons possible, and for every child whose life has been touched by the power of education." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "There was a time when I doubted my ability to create something meaningful, when I felt defined by someone else's vision of success. But what I've learned is that true fulfillment comes from embracing your own path, no matter how uncertain it may seem." The applause that followed was thunderous. James met her at the base of the stage, his smile warm and proud. "You were incredible," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Clara felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for the award, but for the journey it represented. She had stepped out of someone else's shadow and built a legacy of her own. A few days after the gala, Clara received a package in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. It was from Elliot. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, her curiosity piqued. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small leather-bound notebook. The letter was brief, but heartfelt. "Clara, I saw the news about the gala and the award. Congratulations. I can't think of anyone who deserves it more. I've been reflecting a lot since the wedding, and I realized there's something I needed to do. Enclosed is the notebook where I used to jot down my ideas during our early days at Boston University. Many of those ideas became the foundation for Grayson Enterprises, but I never acknowledged how much of that journey was shaped by your support, your belief in me. I want you to have it as a reminder that your impact has always been greater than you realized. Wishing you all the happiness in the world." Elliot. Clara traced her fingers over the cover of the notebook, memories flooding back. She felt no longing, only gratitude for the clarity, the growth, and the life she had now. One evening, as Clara and James walked along the High Line, the city lights twinkling around them, James spoke with a rare seriousness. "You've been through so much," he said, taking her hand. "But it's clear you're not just surviving, you're thriving. I'm lucky to be part of your world." Clara smiled, squeezing his hand. "And I'm lucky to have you in mine." Their steps slowed as they reached the edge of the park. Clara looked out at the skyline, feeling the weight of the past lift completely. She had faced the ghosts of her old life, and now she stood on the precipice of a future defined by her own terms. The chapter ends with Clara resting her head on James's shoulder, the city stretching out before them as a symbol of endless possibility. Chapter 7. Writing Her Own Story. The early spring sun bathed New York City in a golden light, its warmth a promise of renewal. Clara stood on the balcony of her Brooklyn Heights apartment, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. Below, the world bustled with its usual energy, but Clara felt a rare sense of calm, as if the city itself had paused to reflect alongside her. She had spent the morning organizing her workspace, finally deciding to frame the letter and notebook Elliot had sent. They weren't tokens of love or longing, but symbols of the growth and clarity she had gained. Her office now held the physical reminders of her journey, a framed photo of her first literacy program ribbon cutting, awards recognizing her nonprofit's impact, and a growing pile of drafts for a memoir she had tentatively titled Finding Horizons. Later that day, Clara sat in a boardroom at the Penguin Random House offices. She had been invited to discuss her memoir with their editorial team, who had taken an interest in her story after her gala speech had gone viral. The editor-in-chief, a poised woman named Rachel Hargrove, leaned forward with a smile. Clara, your story resonates deeply, not just the professional success, but the personal resilience. It's rare to find someone who can inspire with such authenticity. I think Finding Horizons has the potential to reach a wide audience. Clara smiled, humbled by the praise. I've always believed in the power of stories to connect us. If sharing mine can help others find their strength, then it's worth every vulnerable moment. As they discussed the book's direction, Clara felt a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about sharing her past. It was about reclaiming her narrative and giving it a purpose beyond herself. A few weeks later, Clara hosted a private dinner at Le Bernardin, one of her favorite restaurants, to celebrate the formal launch of her memoir project. Naomi and James were there, along with key members of the Bright Horizons team. It was an intimate gathering, but every guest had played a significant role in Clara's journey. Naomi, ever the life of the party, raised a glass. To Clara, who's proven that strength doesn't come from never falling, but from rising every time. And to her memoir, which I know will inspire millions. The room erupted in cheers and laughter, and Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. "Thank you," she said, standing to address the group. "I wouldn't be here without each of you. You've reminded me that life isn't about the plans we make or the setbacks we face. It's about the people who walk beside us." The following morning, Clara received an unexpected email from Elliot. The subject line was simple: "Thank you. Clara, I read about your memoir project, and I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. I've started my own journey of reflection, and I've realized how much I can learn from the way you've faced your challenges with grace. I'm also making changes in my life. I've begun mentoring young entrepreneurs, hoping to pass on lessons I wish I'd learned earlier. I owe much of that inspiration to you. Wishing you all the best in this new chapter." Clara read the message twice before closing her laptop. It was strange how life had a way of circling back, offering closure when you least expected it. On a bright Saturday morning, Clara and James drove to the Catskills for a weekend retreat. It was their first real getaway together, a chance to step back from their busy lives and simply be present with one another. As they walked along a forest trail, the sun filtering through the trees, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. James reached for her hand, and she smiled up at him. "You're quiet today," he said gently. "What's on your mind?" "Just thinking about how far I've come," she replied. "For so long, I let myself believe I was defined by what I'd lost. But now I see that every step, even the painful ones, brought me to where I'm meant to be." James stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression soft. "And where is that?" "Here," Clara said, gesturing to the world around them. "Living fully, without fear of the past. Writing my own story." He leaned down and kissed her, the moment filled with the quiet joy of shared understanding. As they continued down the trail, the trees opened up to reveal a breathtaking view of the valley below. Clara paused, taking it all in, the endless horizon stretching before her. For the first time in years, she didn't just feel like a woman who had overcome her past, she felt like a woman who had embraced her future. Back in her Brooklyn apartment, Clara typed the final sentence of the first chapter of her memoir. "The most important journey isn't the one that takes you somewhere new. It's the one that brings you back to yourself." She leaned back, a contented smile on her lips. Her story wasn't over, but she knew now that she was the one holding the pen. The novel ends with Clara gazing out at the city skyline, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her face. Her story was just beginning, and the horizon was limitless. Clara closed her laptop and stood by the large window in her Brooklyn Heights apartment. The city skyline stretched before her, bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. She held a cup of tea, her thoughts calm and content. Her journey had been anything but simple, filled with twists, losses, and rediscoveries. But as she stood there, she knew one thing for certain. Life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It was about learning to create those moments, to embrace every high and low, and to keep moving forward with resilience and authenticity. Clara turned, her smile radiant, as if addressing a larger audience beyond the city's glow. If Clara's story inspired you, if it reminded you to embrace your own journey, no matter how challenging, then there's so much more we can share together. Stories have the power to heal, to connect, and to ignite something within us all. Hit that subscribe button now to join a community that believes in resilience, growth, and the beauty of second chances. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that they hold the pen to their own life. Let's keep writing, keep growing, and keep inspiring each other. Together, we'll create stories that change the world. The screen fades to black, but the faint echo of Clara's words lingers, because the best is always yet to come.
A penthouse overlooking Central Park, a walk-in closet overflowing with Hermes, and a baby on the way. Anya had it all. Or so she thought. In the blink of an eye, her billionaire husband, a man who once promised her the world, stood before her, his words colder than the winter wind whipping across their panoramic window. "I want a divorce." But before the ink could dry on the papers, a knock on the door changed everything. His mistress wasn't there to gloat. She was there to expose a secret so dark it would make his demand for a divorce the least of Anya's worries. The scent of blooming peonies and old money filled the air of the penthouse apartment on the 82nd floor of 432 Park Avenue. It was a sterile, curated scent, one that Anya had come to associate with her life, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of the earthy reality she secretly craved. From this height, New York City was a glittering, silent diorama. The yellow cabs were ants, the sprawling green of Central Park, a manicured carpet, and the people, the millions of bustling, striving souls, were entirely insignificant, just like her. Anya traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the stark minimalist decor Julian insisted upon. Everything was shades of grey chrome and glass. It was the home of a man who admired his reflections both literal and financial. He called it uncluttered. Anya called it empty. Her hand drifted down to the gentle swell of her stomach, a 6-month bump that was her only true possession in this sky-high palace. This baby, her baby, was the one vibrant, chaotic, and real thing in her life. It was a secret garden she nurtured within herself, a world away from Julian's meticulous control. Julian Croft. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a visionary in the volatile world of tech mergers and acquisitions. His face, all sharp angles and disarming smiles, graced the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He had a Midas touch, turning fledgling startups into billion-dollar unicorns with a flick of his pen. He had swept Anya off her feet 5 years ago. She was a junior art curator, then full of opinions and passion, and he had seemed utterly captivated by her spirit. He'd courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that leave a woman breathless, a private viewing at the Met, a weekend trip to Paris, on a whim a rare first-edition book of poetry she'd once mentioned in passing. He had built a gilded cage for her, and she, dazzled by the shine, had walked right in. She'd given up her small gallery job, her cramped but cozy apartment in the village, and her circle of wonderfully messy artistic friends. Julian had said he wanted to give her the world. She hadn't realized he meant he wanted to become her entire world. The sound of the private elevator chiming its arrival pulled her from her reverie. Julian was home. Early. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach, a feeling that had become increasingly familiar over the past few months. He strode into the living area, looking every inch the master of the universe, his bespoke Tom Ford suit clung perfectly to his athletic frame, his dark hair was impeccably styled, and his face held the neutral, unreadable expression he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view as if calculating its net worth. Julian Anya began her voice softer than she intended. "You're home. I was just about to have the chef start on dinner." He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes extinguished the small flicker of hope in her chest. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition for his pregnant wife. It was the look he gave a line item on a balance sheet that was underperforming. "Don't bother," he said, his voice flat and clipped. He walked over to the marble bar and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass unnaturally loud in the silent room. "We need to talk, Anya." Anya's hand instinctively went back to her belly, a protective gesture. "Is everything all right? Did the deal with the Japanese consortium fall through?" She tried to grasp for a familiar topic, a corner of his life she was still permitted to understand. He took a long swallow of his drink, his throat bobbing. "The deal is fine. Everything in my life is perfectly aligned. Except this." He gestured vaguely between them, an all-encompassing wave that dismissed their 5 years of marriage. Their shared bed, the child growing inside her. This she whispered, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. This marriage, he stated, turning to face her fully. His face was a mask of detached finality. "It's run its course. It no longer serves its purpose. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, sharp and deadly, like shards of glass from the panoramic window he so admired. Anya felt the blood drain from her face. She must have misheard. This was Julian's idea of a joke, a cruel, power-playing jest to see her squirm. "A divorce," she stammered, a hysterical little laugh escaping her lips. "Julian, what are you talking about?" "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby." "I'm aware of the child's existence," he said, his voice laced with an icy patience that was more terrifying than any shout. "My lawyers have already been instructed to be generous. A trust will be established for the child. You will be provided with a settlement that will allow you to live very comfortably. A nice apartment, a staff, whatever you need. You will want for nothing materially." Materially. The word was an insult, a deliberate reduction of her life, her love, her very being to a transaction. The man who had once quoted poetry to her was now liquidating her like a bad asset. "I don't want a settlement, Julian. I want my husband. I want the father of my child." Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed composure of the perfect wife, shattering into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "What has happened to you? What has happened to us? Nothing has happened," he insisted, his calm unwavering. He was a stone wall, impervious to her pain. "This was always a contract, Anya. An arrangement. You provided beauty, social grace, a certain aesthetic. I provided a lifestyle beyond your wildest dreams. The contract is now being terminated." "A contract?" She stared at him aghast. The last 5 years replayed in her mind, now tainted and twisted by his cruel words. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, every whispered promise now felt like a lie, a performance. She felt a wave of nausea so profound it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She had been a fool, a beautiful, well-kept, blind fool. There's someone else, isn't there? The question was a classic, a cliché she never thought she'd utter. For the first time, A flicker of something crossed his face. Not guilt, but a flicker of annoyance, as if she were a fly buzzing around his head. That's irrelevant to the situation. Irrelevant? She cried, her voice rising. You're throwing me out pregnant with your child, and you tell me your mistress is irrelevant. Who is she, Julian? He walked over to the sleek obsidian desk in the corner and pulled a thick document from a leather briefcase. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table between them. The sound was a final, definitive thud. These are the divorce papers, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. My lawyers advise you to sign them without contest. A prolonged, messy battle will not be beneficial for you, or for the public's perception of you. I have a reputation to maintain. He was threatening her. He was threatening to paint her as a gold digger, a shrew, to drag her name through the mud, while he stood pristine on his mountain of money. The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was trying to erase her, to control the very narrative of her existence, even as he expelled her from his. She looked from the papers to his cold, handsome face. The man she loved, or the man she thought she loved, was gone. In his place stood a monster, a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice and ego. A profound, chilling clarity washed over her. The shock receded, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar anger. No, she said, her voice trembling, but firm. Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. No. I will not sign these. I will not be discarded like one of your failed investments. This child, she said, her hand protectively cradling her belly, deserves a father. And I deserve an explanation. A real one. Julian's jaw tightened. He was not used to being told no. The air crackled with his silent fury. He took a step towards her, his physical presence suddenly feeling overwhelming, threatening. You are making a grave mistake, Anya, he hissed. You have no idea what you're messing with. You have no idea the forces at play here. Sign the papers. Take the money. Disappear quietly. It's the best option for everyone. His words held a hidden weight, a darker undercurrent that went beyond a simple sordid affair. The forces at play here. It wasn't the plea of a man in love with someone else. It was a warning, a threat. Before Anya could respond, before she could decipher the strange, panicked glint in his eyes, the chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse once more. Both their heads snapped towards the sound. Julian's face, for the first time that evening, lost its composure. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his features so quick that Anya almost missed it. He looked trapped. Who is that? Anya asked, her own confusion mounting. They weren't expecting anyone. Julian guarded their privacy with a zeal that bordered on paranoid. Don't. Julian breathed, his eyes wide, as he stared at the elevator doors. It wasn't a command to Anya, but a desperate plea to the universe. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft, expensive sigh. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with raven black hair cut into a sharp, severe bob, and eyes the color of emeralds. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, bloody slash of color in the monochrome world of Julian's penthouse. Anya's heart stopped. It had to be her. The mistress. She had come to gloat, to witness the final destruction of the wife to claim her prize. Anya braced herself for the humiliation, the final crushing blow. But the woman's eyes weren't on Anya. They were locked on Julian, and they held no trace of triumph. Her beautiful face was pale. Her hands were trembling, and her emerald eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored the panic on Julian's face. She took a shaky step into the room. Julian, the woman, said, her voice a ragged whisper that cut through the silence. "It's over. They know. They know everything." Julian stared at her, his mask of control utterly shattered. He looked like a man staring at his own ghost. Anya looked back and forth between her husband and this beautiful, terrified stranger. A cold dread far deeper and more terrifying than the pain of betrayal began to creep up her spine. This wasn't about a simple affair. Julian's strange warning, his panic, this woman's fear, it was all connected to something far bigger. The divorce papers lay on the table, forgotten. The gilded cage had just burst open, but Anya had a sickening feeling that she hadn't been set free. She had just been tossed into the fire. The woman in the crimson dress took another hesitant step into the cavernous living room. Her designer heels, which should have clicked with authority on the polished marble floor, were instead unnervingly silent, as if she were trying to retract her own presence. Anya's mind, still reeling from the whiplash of the divorce demand, struggled to process this new bizarre tableau. The mistress, for who else could she be, wasn't acting like a victor. She was acting like a fugitive. "Isabel, what the hell are you doing here?" Julian finally managed to say, his voice a strangled rasp. He shot a venomous glare at her, a look that was less about a spurned lover and more about a co-conspirator who had broken rank. He moved almost unconsciously to position himself between Isabel and Anya, a futile attempt to control the flow of information. "I tried to call you Isabel," said her voice trembling. She ignored Anya completely, her gaze fixed on Julian's increasingly frantic expression. "Your phone was off. I left a dozen messages with your secretary. I had to come. We don't have any time." "Time for what?" Anya interjected, her voice finding a new steely edge. The initial shock was beginning to curdle into suspicion. "Time to coordinate your stories before you throw me out." Isabel's head snapped towards Anya, and for the first time she seemed to truly see her. There was no malice in her emerald eyes, no smug superiority. Instead, Anya saw a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like pity. It was an expression that infuriated Anya more than any taunt could have. "This has nothing to do with your marriage," Isabel said, with a dismissive wave of her hand that was so absolute it was chilling. "That's just collateral damage. A loose end he was trying to tie up." "A loose end." Anya repeated the words, tasting like ash. She looked at Julian, whose face was now a ghastly shade of pale. "Is that what I am to you, Julian? A loose end?" "Shut up!" Isabel Julian roared, finally losing the last vestige of his icy control. He lunged towards her, grabbing her arm. "You shouldn't be here. We had a plan. The plan is shot to hell." "Julian." Isabel wrenched her arm free, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of anger. "The plan went up in smoke the moment my brother's name appeared on the SEC's inquiry list this morning. The acronym hung in the air, SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal agency that policed Wall Street, the boogeyman of every high-flying financier. It was a name Anya knew from the headlines from the periphery of Julian's world, but it had never felt real, never had any bearing on her curated life. Until now. What SEC inquiry Anya demanded, stepping forward. She was no longer just a passive victim in a domestic drama. She was an unwilling participant in something far more sinister. Julian. What is she talking about? She's talking nonsense. Julian spat, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist 82 floors in the sky. She's hysterical. Her brother made some bad investments, and now she's panicking and trying to drag me into it. He was trying to rebuild his wall of composure, but the cracks were showing. His hands were trembling, and a thin sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. Bad investments. Isabel let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor. Is that what you call it? You used him. Julian. You used my family's brokerage firm as a shield. You ran the entire scheme through their accounts. Made them look like the masterminds while you stayed clean. Scheme. The word was a poison dart. Anya's gaze swung back to Julian. His entire empire, his Midas touch, was it all just a trick? A lie, just like their marriage. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice low and threatening as he took a step towards Isabel. And I suggest you leave now before you say something you'll regret. No. Isabel stood her ground, her chin held high. The fear was still there, but it was now bolstered by a desperate, cornered resolve. I'm not taking the fall for you. My brother is not going to prison for you. I loved you, Julian, or I thought I did, but I see what you are now. You don't love anyone. You consume them. You use them up, and then you discard the husk. Her eyes flickered to Anya. She knows. Don't you? Anya thought back. The last 6 months, Julian's increasing secrecy, his late nights at the office, which she had assumed were due to his affair, the strange hushed phone calls he would take in his study, ending them abruptly if she walked in, the way he had systematically isolated her, severing her ties to her old friends, even discouraging visits from her own family, claiming he wanted to protect her peace and privacy during her pregnancy. It hadn't been about protecting her. It had been about isolating a witness. What scheme, Julian Anya's voice was dangerously quiet. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying calm. What did you do? Anya, listen to me, Julian said, turning to her, his voice attempting a gentleness that now sounded grotesque and manipulative. She's a scorned woman. She's trying to ruin me because I ended our affair. It's the oldest story in the book. You're my wife. You're the mother of my child. It's you I'm trying to protect. He was trying to play her to use their shared history and their unborn child as a shield. But the spell was broken. She could see the puppeteer's strings. Protect. She repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. By demanding a divorce an hour ago, by calling me a loose end, you needed to tie up. You weren't trying to protect me. You were trying to cut me loose before the ship sank, weren't you? You wanted to make sure I couldn't claim a single cent of your precious, dirty money when it all came crashing down. The truth of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. The divorce wasn't about his love for Isabel. It was a calculated financial maneuver. A preemptive strike in a war he knew was coming. He was willing to make his own pregnant wife a refugee from his life to save himself. It's called a SPAC, Isabel said. Suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. She was no longer speaking just to Julian, but to Anya, to the room, to the universe. She was confessing. A special purpose acquisition company. It's the cleanest grift on Wall Street right now. Anya had heard Julian talk about SPACs. He'd called them blank check companies, a faster, more efficient way to take a private company, public bypassing the rigorous scrutiny of a traditional IPO. He had launched 3 of them in the last 2 years, raising billions from investors eager to get in on the ground floor of his next big thing. The media had lauded him as an innovator. Your husband Isabel, continued her voice, gaining a morbid momentum, is a master at selling dreams. He would launch a SPAC, promising to merge it with a revolutionary tech company. The hype alone would send the stock soaring. Investors from massive hedge funds to ordinary people would pour their life savings into it all, based on his reputation. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But there was no company, Anya. There was never any revolutionary tech. It was all smoke and mirrors. A shell game. Julian lunged for her again. "You're lying, am I?" Isabel sidestepped him, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. "Tell her about Project Chimera, Julian. Tell her about the next-gen AI integration platform that was going to change the world. Show her the fancy prospectus, the one with the fabricated data and the photoshopped pictures of a non-existent office in Silicon Valley." She turned back to Anya, her voice dropping. "The money from the investors. It wasn't used for acquisitions. It was funneled, laundered through a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations, one of which was my brother's unwitting firm. Julian would skim off hundreds of millions, paying off early investors with money from new ones to keep the illusion going. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, Anya just dressed up in a fancy Wall Street suit. And the whole thing is about to collapse." Anya stared at Julian, waiting for him to deny it, to rage, to offer some plausible explanation. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, breathing heavily, the cornered animal, the master of the universe, brought low by a single, unraveling thread. The entire foundation of her life, the penthouse, the clothes, the art, the security was not just built on lies, but on theft, on the stolen dreams and life savings of countless unknown people. She felt a dizzying vertigo, the floor seeming to drop away beneath her. Her hand flew to her stomach, to the one pure thing in this world of deceit. This child, her son or daughter, was heir to a fortune that didn't exist, a legacy of shame. So the divorce. Anya trailed off, the full, monstrous picture becoming clear. The settlement you offered me, that generous trust for our peaceful child. Where was that money coming from, Julian? He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the dark, terrifying truth. "It's the last of the clean money, isn't it?" she whispered in horror. "The money you had before all this started. You were trying to firewall it, to put it in my name and the baby's name so the SEC couldn't touch it when they came for the rest. You weren't giving me a gift. You were using your pregnant wife and your unborn child as a money mule." The silence that followed was a confession. It was the most damning sound Anya had ever heard. The man she had married was not just a cheat or a liar. He was a predator of the highest order, and he had just tried to make her his final accomplice. The doorbell chimed, not the private elevator this time, but the main service door to the apartment. A loud, insistent official buzzing. It was a sound none of them could ignore. Julian, Isabel, and Anya all froze, their 3-person drama instantly rendered insignificant. This was no longer a private implosion. The outside world was knocking. Julian's eyes, wide with terror, met Anya's. The last shred of his bravado was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man whose time had run out. The buzzing came again, longer this time, more demanding. "Don't answer it. Julian whispered a desperate, futile command. But Anya was already walking towards the door. The fog of her shock and betrayal was beginning to clear, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had been a pawn in his game for far too long. The game was over. Her hand closed around the cold steel handle of the door. Whatever was on the other side, it was the beginning of her new reality. She had to face it, for herself and for the child she carried. She pulled the door open. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark, conservative suits. They were nondescript, their faces impassive, but they carried an aura of unshakable authority that made the air in the multi-million-dollar penthouse feel cheap and thin. One of them held up a badge and an official-looking document. Julian Croft, the lead agent, asked, his voice calm and professional, but with an underlying steel that tolerated no argument. His eyes flicked past Anya to where Julian stood frozen in the middle of the living room. "I'm Agent Miller with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises." The FBI. The letters seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. It was one thing to hear the acronym SEC from a panicked mistress. It was another to see the flesh and blood embodiment of a federal investigation standing on your doorstep. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. He stared at the agents, his mouth slightly agape. The master manipulator suddenly a speechless puppet. Isabel let out a small, choked sob and sank onto one of the ridiculously expensive minimalist sofas, her crimson dress pooling around her like a stain. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the grim resignation of someone who had pulled the pin on a grenade and was now simply waiting for the blast. Agent Miller and his partner stepped into the apartment, their sensible shoes making solid, real-world sounds on the marble floor. Anya stepped back, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She was watching a movie of her own life imploding. The agent's eyes swept the room, cataloguing the art, the furniture, the view, not with admiration, but with the cold appraisal of an asset seizure. "We also have a warrant for your arrest." "Mr. Croft." Agent Miller continued in the same dispassionate tone, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "For conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." The words were a death sentence, a formal indictment of everything Isabel had just revealed. The Ponzi scheme project, Chimera. The stolen money, it was all real. And now the consequences were real too. "This is a mistake," Julian finally stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. "My lawyers." "Your lawyers have been notified," Agent Miller cut him off smoothly. "They can meet you downtown. Please place your hands behind your back." The sight of Julian Croft, the titan of Wall Street, the man whose confident smirk had sold billions in fraudulent dreams, being handcuffed in his own living room, was surreal. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was the final definitive sound of his world ending. He didn't resist. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed shock. As the second agent began to lead Julian towards the door, Isabel suddenly stood up, her face streaked with tears, but her voice filled with a new urgent terror. "Wait!" she cried out, her voice sharp. "That's not all. That's not the real reason." Agent Miller paused, turning to her with a look of mild professional interest. "The real reason for what, ma'am?" "For the divorce," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "For why he had to get her out. It's not just about the money. There's something else, something worse." Anya, who had been standing silently by the wall, felt a new wave of ice-cold dread. Worse. What could possibly be worse than a billion-dollar fraud that had ruined countless lives? What was the dark secret that even a massive financial crime was meant to cover up? Julian's head snapped up. He shot a look at Isabel, a look of pure murderous rage mixed with desperate pleading. Isabel, no. Don't. I have to, she sobbed. They need to know everything. They need to know why you were so desperate. She turned to the agents, her words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. The SPACs. The fraud. That was the end game. But it started somewhere else. It started with his first company. Gen Tech Solutions. Anya vaguely remembered the name. It was the company Julian had founded before they met the one that had given him his initial millions and launched his reputation as a tech prodigy. He had sold it for a massive profit years ago. What about it? Agent Miller asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Gentech's flagship product was a proprietary data encryption software, Isabel explained, her voice gaining clarity as she forced the story out. It was sold to dozens of high-level corporate clients, banks, law firms, private equity funds. They promised impenetrable security. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Anya's. The pity was back in her gaze, but now it was deeper, darker, filled with a horror that Anya couldn't yet comprehend. But it wasn't an encryption software, Anya. It was a key. Julian built a back door into the system, a master key that gave him access to everything. For years he had a live feed into the most sensitive corporate data in the country. Mergers and acquisitions plans, confidential legal strategies, insider trading information. The scale of it was dizzying. Julian hadn't just been a con artist. He had been a digital phantom, a ghost in the machine systematically stealing the lifeblood of the corporate world. That's how he made his first fortune. Isabel continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It wasn't genius. It was theft on an industrial scale. He knew which companies were going to be acquired before they did. He knew which stocks would soar and which would plummet. He wasn't predicting the market. He was reading the script. The agents exchanged a look. This was new information. This went beyond the SPACs. This was the origin story of his entire criminal enterprise. But that's still not the secret. Isabel choked out, tears streaming down her face again. That's just more fraud. Then what is it? Anya finally spoke, her voice a hollow echo in the room. She had to know. She had to know the final, terrible truth that was poisoning the very air she breathed. Isabel's gaze was fixed on Anya's pregnant belly. 2 years ago, one of the companies he was spying on, a pharmaceutical firm called Biovance. They were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a revolutionary new gene therapy treatment. But they had a problem. Their final human trials were showing some irregularities, dangerous side effects that they were trying to solve before announcing the drug. Julian was now shaking his head violently, his muffled pleas ignored by the agent holding him. Don't say it, Isabel. Please. Julian knew the drug was flawed. Isabel forged on her voice, cracking with the weight of her confession. He had access to the raw, hidden data. He knew it was dangerous. But he also knew that if another company acquired Biovance, before the flaws were public, the stock would triple overnight. So he used his insider information. He leaked the news of the potential breakthrough without mentioning the dangerous side effects to a rival corporation. They initiated a hostile takeover, and Julian, having bought millions in Biovance stock beforehand, made a fortune. Over $200 million in a single week. That's insider trading. A huge case, but Agent Miller prompted. But it wasn't just insider trading. Isabel screamed, the sound raw and agonizing. The new company, eager to recoup their investment, rushed the drug to market. They buried the flawed data. They pushed it through a compromised approval process. The drug was called Veridia. Anya's blood ran cold. Veridia. The name was a lightning bolt, a searing brand on her memory. It was prescribed as an advanced fertility treatment. Isabel whispered, her eyes locked on Anya's. For couples who had tried everything else, it was hailed as a miracle drug. Anya's hand, the one not pressed against her stomach, flew to her mouth. No, it couldn't be. The room began to spin. The minimalist grey walls seemed to close in on her. She and Julian had struggled to conceive. For 2 years they had been through a heart-breaking cycle of hope and disappointment. Doctors had found no specific issue, just unexplained infertility. Then a year ago, a new specialist, a top doctor recommended by Julian himself, had suggested a new cutting-edge treatment. A miracle drug from Europe, he had called it. Its name was Veridia. Anya stared at Julian, at the man she had married, the man whose child she was carrying. The man who had looked on with what she thought was shared joy when the pregnancy test finally came back positive. But it hadn't been joy. It had been the culmination of a monstrous plan. The side effects, Anya could barely form the words. Her throat was tight with terror. What were the side effects? Julian finally broke. A guttural, animalistic sob tore from his chest. Anya, I'm sorry. I can fix it. We have money. The best doctors. Isabel gave the final brutal answer, her voice devoid of all emotion, a flat line of horror. It worked. The drug allowed women to conceive. That part was true. But the hidden data from the original trials showed that in nearly 80% of cases, the fetus would develop a rare and fatal neurological disorder. Most didn't survive the 3rd trimester. Those who were born didn't live past their 1st year. The world went silent. The agents, the handcuffs, the penthouse, it all dissolved into an indistinct blur. The only thing that was real was the life kicking inside her. A life she had craved, a life she had celebrated, a life that had been conceived through a monstrous lie, a poison given to her by the man she loved. This was the dark secret. The divorce wasn't about protecting his money. It was about severing all ties before his child was born with the fatal condition he himself had knowingly unleashed upon the world. He wasn't trying to disown a wife. He was trying to outrun a death sentence. He was trying to erase the ultimate evidence of his crime, his own dying child. Anya looked at her husband, the father of her child, the architect of her destruction. He was no longer a man. He was a void. A black hole of greed and ambition that had consumed everything, including the life of his own unborn baby. The strength drained from her legs. The room tilted violently, the glittering view of Central Park spinning into a nauseating vortex. As her knees buckled and the world faded to black, the last thing she heard was the distant hollow sound of her own scream. Anya awoke to a world bleached of all color. The first sensation was not sight, but smell. A sharp, aggressive scent of antiseptic that scoured her nostrils and bore no resemblance to the curated peony and old money fragrance of her former life. The second was sound, the soft, insistent, and terrifyingly rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere to her left. For a fleeting, merciful moment, she was adrift in a sea of disorientation, the horrors of the previous evening feeling like the suffocating remnants of a fever dream. Had it been real? The cold words, the crimson dress, the click of handcuffs. Then with the force of a physical impact, the memories crashed back in. Viridia. The name detonated in her mind a single word that contained a universe of betrayal. It was the name of the drug. The poison, the monstrous lie she had welcomed into her body. A raw, guttural sob tore itself from her throat, and her hand, trembling uncontrollably, flew to her stomach. The gentle, reassuring swell was still there, a fragile vessel in a venomous sea. Was her baby the one pure thing she had left already a ghost? Easy now, Mrs. Croft. Take a deep breath. A calm, steady voice pierced through the fog of her panic. A woman in navy blue scrubs her face, a welcome portrait of professional kindness, was adjusting the IV drip in Anya's arm. You fainted. We brought you straight to Lenox Hill Hospital. We've been monitoring you and the baby. The baby, Anya's voice, was a ragged whisper, a thread of sound in the cavernous silence of her fear. She couldn't bring herself to ask the real question, the one that clawed at the inside of her skull. Is it dying? The nurse's eyes softened with understanding. The baby is fine, she said, her words deliberate and clear. A little stressed when you were brought in, but the heartbeat is strong and steady now. Your own heart rate is elevated, which is understandable. You've had a severe shock. The baby is strong. 4 simple words. They were not a cure, not a promise, but they were a lifeline. In the raging flood of her shattered reality, Anya clung to them as if they were the last solid ground on earth. Her baby was a fighter. It was already more than its father had ever been. I need to see a doctor, Anya managed, pushing herself up slightly. The effort made the room spin. A specialist, not just an OB, a geneticist, someone who understands. I need to know everything. Her voice broke on the last word. She needed to know the shape of the monster she was facing. We've already paged the head of our maternal fetal medicine department, Dr. Elena Ramirez. The nurse reassured her, fluffing a thin pillow behind her head. She's the best. She'll be here to speak with you shortly. For now, just try to breathe. Rest was an impossible luxury. Her mind was a torture chamber, replaying Julian's face, twisting in panic, the cold finality of the FBI agent's voice, and Isabel's horrified confession over and over. The entire architecture of her life, a magnificent structure she had once admired, had been revealed as a criminal enterprise, a house of cards built on stolen dreams. And the final, most intimate, most unspeakable betrayal was swimming in her very womb, conceived from a miracle that was in truth a time bomb. As the nurse left to give her a moment, another figure appeared hesitantly in the doorway. It was Isabel. She had shed the blood-red dress, the armor of Julian's mistress, and now wore a simple, anonymous pair of jeans and a grey sweater. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the faint purple smudges of exhaustion beneath her eyes. The emerald fire in her irises had been banked, leaving a weary, sorrowful glow. Anya's body tensed. A primal part of her wanted to scream at this woman, the beautiful harbinger of her apocalypse. But the anger felt distant, a secondary emotion, muted by the all-consuming terror of Julian's ultimate sin. Isabel wasn't the enemy. She was just another piece of scorched debris in the blast radius of Julian Croft. "What do you want?" Anya asked, her voice raspy, devoid of accusation, but heavy with exhaustion. I came to see if you were all right," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. She hovered by the door, a respectful distance away, as if acknowledging she was trespassing on sacred ground of grief. "And to tell you, I told them everything." Anya remained silent, watching her. "The agents at the penthouse," Isabel clarified, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "After they took you, I stayed for hours. I told them about Viridia, about the Bio-Vance data, about Julian's back door into Gentech. I gave them the offshore account numbers he'd bragged about, the server locations he thought were hidden. Everything I knew. My brother is working with them too. He's turning over every record from his firm. He's terrified, but he wants to make it right." Why, Anya's question was genuine, a flicker of curiosity in the darkness. Why not just disappear? "He would have given you money to run." Isabel finally met her gaze, and Anya saw the profound depth of her self-loathing. Because he was going to let my brother, my family, take the fall for a crime he masterminded. That was the first crack in the fantasy. But the moment I found out about Viridia, the real truth of it, I looked at him, Julian, the man I thought I loved, and I saw a void. It wasn't just greed, Anya. What kind of person knowingly condemns unborn children for profit? It was a level of evil I couldn't comprehend. Her eyes flickered to Anya's stomach. "When he told me he was divorcing you, I knew why. He was running from the evidence, from his own child. And I knew you were pregnant, but I didn't know about the drug. Not until my brother's lawyer uncovered the connection. The thought of you, going through the rest of your pregnancy celebrating only to face that." She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. "I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't let you be the last one to know the truth. It was the only thing I could do to claw back a single shred of my own soul." In that moment, Anya saw past the affair, past the label of mistress. She saw another woman who had been utterly conned, another life consumed by Julian's insatiable ego. They were bound by a strange, twisted sisterhood forged in the fires of his spectacular destruction. "They've frozen everything." Isabel added her voice, flat and emotionless. "Every asset. The penthouse is a federal crime scene. The accounts are locked. The cars, the art, the watches, it's all gone. Evidence in the largest fraud case in a decade. His lawyers are saying the evidence is insurmountable. He'll never see the outside of a prison cell again." Good, a cold, hard part of Anya thought. Let him rot. But the satisfaction was hollow, a fleeting warmth in an Arctic landscape of pain. Julian's imprisonment couldn't reverse time, couldn't purify the poison. The door opened again, and a woman with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of calm authority entered the room. "Mrs. Croft, I'm Dr. Ramirez." With a final lingering look of profound regret, Isabel quietly slipped out of the room, leaving Anya to face her new reality. The next hour was a clinical, terrifying blur of medical terminology, consent forms, and agonizing questions. Dr. Ramirez was a miracle of empathy and professionalism. She explained the process for an advanced diagnostic amniocentesis carefully and patiently, outlining the procedure, the risks, and the stark reality of the potential results. She didn't offer false hope, only facts. And for that, Anya was grateful. I have to know, Dr. Anya pleaded, her composure finally crumbling under the clinical weight of it all. Whatever it is, I have to know what I'm facing. We will get you answers, Dr. Ramirez promised, her hand briefly resting on Anya's arm. The simple human touch was grounding. As quickly and as safely as we possibly can. The days that followed were a unique form of purgatory. Anya remained in the hospital, a voluntary prisoner in a sterile white room, while the world outside feasted on the carcass of her old life. The news of Julian's arrest had gone supernova. "Wall Street Wunderkind, or Ponzi King," screamed the cable news chyrons. His smug, handsome face was plastered everywhere the poster boy for catastrophic hubris. The stories detailed the SPAC's fraud in lurid detail, but the darkest secret, the corporate evil of Viridia, remained a tightly sealed component of the federal case, a horror not yet fit for public consumption. Anya refused all visitors, save for her parents, who flew in immediately, their faces etched with a pain that mirrored her own. She hired a team of lawyers, not to fight for a share of Julian's blood money, but to meticulously expunge him from her life. To dissolve the marriage, to legally and financially firewall her child from the toxic Croft name and its indelible legacy of shame. She existed in a state of suspended animation, the week-long wait for the test results stretching into an eternity. She didn't sleep, she merely drifted in and out of consciousness. In her waking hours, she would stare out the window at the city, a city that now seemed alien to her. Every pregnant woman she saw, every baby in a stroller was a stab to the heart. She was suspended between a life that was over and a future that was too terrifying to contemplate. Finally, the day came. Dr. Ramirez entered her room alone, closing the door softly behind her. She held a file, and her expression was calm, professional, and utterly unreadable. Anya's heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. This was it, the precipice. She gripped her own hands over her belly, a protective gesture that felt painfully inadequate. Dr. Ramirez sat in the chair beside the bed, opened the file but didn't look at it. She looked directly at Anya. "We have the results from the full genomic sequencing panel," she said, her voice even. Anya held her breath, bracing for the impact, for the words that would shatter the final fragments of her world. Dr. Ramirez took a slow, deliberate breath. "Anya, your baby is perfectly healthy." The words didn't register. They were a language she had forgotten how to speak. Anya just stared at her, her mind a blank slate of incomprehension. "What, no? That's not possible. Viridia, the neurological degradation." I know, the doctor said gently, her professional calm finally breaking into a warm, reassuring smile. "We read the federal case files your lawyers managed to get unsealed for us. We knew the exact rare genetic markers we were looking for, and they are not there. We ran the test twice to be certain. He is completely, unequivocally unaffected. He." Her mind snagged on the word. "He. You're having a son." Anya Dr. Ramirez confirmed, her eyes shining. "A healthy baby boy." The dam broke. A sound, a wail that was equal parts grief and joy, tore from deep inside her. It was the sound of a week of terror, of months of unknowing, of a lifetime of betrayal, being washed away by a single miraculous wave of relief. The tears came, then hot and cleansing, pouring down her face as she finally truly let go. But how she sobbed, her body shaking. Isabel said, 80%. 80% is not 100%, the doctor said, softly, her voice thick with emotion. It means 20%, 1 in 5 were spared. It's a game of Russian roulette, played with the most precious stakes imaginable. It's a monstrous, unforgivable gamble. But Anya, you and your son, you won. She won. It wasn't a victory over Julian. It was a victory over fate, over poison, over the darkness that had tried to claim her future. Anya checked out of the hospital the next morning. The world looked different, the colors more vibrant, the air cleaner. The Julian Croft penthouse on Park Avenue was sealed a monument to a dead life. She walked away from it without a backward glance. With a small, life-saving loan from her parents, she found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn's Park Slope. It was a world away from the silent, sterile grandeur she had known. From her window, she saw not a curated park, but a living one. She could hear the joyful shrieks of children playing the friendly bark of dogs, the distant, reassuring rumble of the F-train. It was the chaotic, beautiful symphony of real life. She spent the final peaceful months of her pregnancy rebuilding. She bought a second-hand crib and painted the nursery a cheerful, sunny yellow. She reconnected with her old circle of wonderfully messy, artistic friends who enveloped her in a cocoon of unconditional love and support, never once mentioning her notorious past. They brought her soup, helped her assemble furniture, and made her laugh, truly laugh for the first time in years. 3 months later, Leo Alexander was born, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. He was loud, demanding, and utterly perfect. He had her eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair. Holding him for the first time, skin to skin, feeling his tiny, fragile fingers instinctively curl around hers. Anya felt a love so vast and powerful it rearranged her entire universe. This was real wealth. This was a legacy. One rainy afternoon as a 2-week-old, Leo slept soundly on her chest. A news alert popped up on her phone. Julian Croft sentenced. She read that faced with an avalanche of evidence and Isabel's unshakable testimony, he had accepted a plea bargain to avoid having the full horrific details of the Viridia scandal made public in a trial. He was sentenced to 150 years in a federal supermax facility with no possibility of parole. Anya looked down at her sleeping son, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. She felt no hatred for Julian, no desire for revenge. She felt nothing at all. He was a ghost, the antagonist of a story that was already over. Her story and Leo's was just beginning. Her life was no longer defined by the man she had lost, but by the son she had almost lost and had miraculously gained. She was not the millionaire's disgraced wife. She was Leo's mother, and in the quiet, sun-drenched world of her small Brooklyn apartment, she was the richest woman in the world. Anya's story is a harrowing journey from a gilded cage to true freedom. It's a reminder that wealth can be a mask for unimaginable darkness, and that true strength isn't found in penthouses or designer clothes, but in the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. She lost a life of luxury, but gained a life of purpose, proving that even after the most devastating betrayals, we have the power to rise from the ashes and build a new world for ourselves and for our children. Her story isn't just about the downfall of a wicked man, but the rise of an unbreakable woman. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of drama resilience and ultimate justice. Let us know in the comments what you think of Anya's incredible journey.